What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle was built on a version of the truth so polished, so carefully edited, that the real story was buried before it ever had a chance to breathe? Because behind the royal headlines, behind the curated interviews, and the perfectly timed public appearances, there is a whisper that refuses to die. A whisper that begins long, before palaces, before princes, before the world ever learned her name. It begins in quiet neighborhoods in places no cameras were watching, where the version of events we've all been fed starts to fracture in ways that feel deliberate, calculated, almost too clean to be real. And at the center of that whisper is a name that keeps resurfacing like a shadow that won't stay buried. Joe Giuliano. Not a celebrity, not a headline magnet, just a man from a deeply traditional family, a world away from the polished corridors of royalty. But sometimes it's exactly those worlds that hold the most dangerous secrets, because they were never meant to collide. People close to that chapter describe something intense, something fast-moving, something that didn't feel like a typical young romance, but more like a story being written in real time with edits, always edits, because even then they say there were inconsistencies, small ones at first, harmless maybe, but then patterns, and patterns don't lie. They build, they repeat, they expose stories that shifted depending on who was listening, details that didn't quite align, a past that seemed flexible, almost like it could be reshaped on demand. And when you zoom out, when you connect those fragments, the picture that starts forming isn't just complicated, it's unsettling. Because what if this wasn't just reinvention? What if it was something more deliberate? The Giuliano family, by all accounts, wasn't chasing fame. They were rooted, traditional, the kind of people who valued consistency, history, truth. And when someone enters that kind of environment carrying shifting narratives, it doesn't go unnoticed. It lingers. It raises questions no one wants to ask out loud, but everyone starts thinking. And then there are the rumors, the ones that refuse to fade no matter how much time passes. A quiet ceremony, a marriage that may or may not have happened. No clear records, no photographs, no digital trace, just memories, human ones, the kind that don't disappear just because paperwork does. That's where it gets uncomfortable, because erasing a moment is one thing. Erasing people, entire connections, that takes something else entirely. Effort, resources, intent. And insiders from that world, quiet voices, never fully stepping into the spotlight, have suggested something chilling, that what looked like a relationship may have felt to them like a performance. A role being played, a version of a person crafted to fit a specific moment, a specific goal. If that's true, then what happens when the role is no longer needed? You walk away, cleanly, completely. And that's exactly what makes the next part so difficult to ignore. The gaps, the strange absences in records, the missing pieces that don't behave like normal oversights, they behave like something was removed, carefully, intentionally. Some even claim timelines don't match, that ages, dates, milestones don't quite align the way they should. And while individually those details might seem small, together they create something heavier, a pattern of revision, a life that doesn't sit still long enough to be pinned down. And then comes the most explosive whisper of all, the one that changes everything if even a fraction of it holds weight. The mention of a child, a name passed quietly in certain circles, a story tied to a period that already feels blurred, already feels edited. No confirmation, no official acknowledgement, just fragments, observations, memories from people who insist they saw something that doesn't exist on paper. And that's where the tension sharpens. Because if this is all just rumor, then why does it keep resurfacing? Why did the same threads appear again and again across different places, different people, different years? Why does it feel less like gossip and more like something incomplete? According to the file, the early version of this story, the one presented to the public, was always clean, simple, almost too perfect. A narrative of ambition, struggle, and eventual triumph. But the deeper you look, the more it feels like that narrative might have been curated. And here's the uncomfortable truth no one wants to say out loud. Curated stories don't just happen. They are built, maintained, protected. So the real question isn't whether every rumor is true. The real question is, why does it feel like something is missing? Why do so many pieces seem just out of reach? And if the past really was as clean as it's been presented, then why does it feel like it's still trying to catch up? Because silence, especially this kind of silence, doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded. And the longer it lasts, the louder it becomes. And just when it feels like the story couldn't stretch any further without snapping, something even more unsettling begins to take shape. Not a single revelation. Not one explosive piece of evidence, but a slow creeping realization that this might not be about one secret. It might be about a system of silence built to protect something far bigger than anyone expected. Because the moment the name Joe Giuliano starts resurfacing again, years after disappearing into obscurity, it doesn't come back quietly. It comes back with weight, with implication, with the kind of tension that suggests something unfinished, something unresolved, something that never actually ended. It was just paused. And according to the file, what makes this even more disturbing is not what's been proven, but what keeps aligning in ways that feel too precise to be coincidence. There are mentions of movement, not emotional movement, physical movement. A family that didn't just distance themselves but vanished, packed up their lives, erased their presence, and relocated so completely that it felt less like a decision and more like a disappearance. No forwarding address, no trail, just gone. And when people disappear like that, it's rarely random. It usually means one of two things. They're running from something, or they've been asked to stay hidden. And that's where the story starts tightening like a knot. Because if everything was normal, if everything was clean, then why would an entire family remove themselves so thoroughly from one country and reappear somewhere else under different variations of identity? Why retreat into a place where silence isn't just respected, it's expected? A place where questions aren't asked and answers don't travel? It suggests pressure, quiet pressure, the kind that doesn't leave fingerprints but leaves impact. And then, layered on top of that, are the whispers of financial arrangements, documents that allegedly surfaced years later, tied to names that shouldn't be connected anymore, dated at moments that feel strategic, not random, not accidental, timed, almost like closing chapters before opening new ones. And if those documents exist, if even a portion of that timeline holds, then the implication becomes impossible to ignore, that something was settled before something else began. Because timing in stories like this is never just timing, it's intention. And then there's the photograph, the one that refuses to disappear no matter how often it's dismissed. Grainy, distant, easy to doubt until you look closer, because sometimes the clearest truths come wrapped in the blurriest images. A figure that resembles Meghan Markle standing in a place she was never officially supposed to be at a time that doesn't align with the narrative the world was given. And beside her, figures that shouldn't exist within that version of her life. Now here's where it becomes unsettling in a different way, because if that image is meaningless, if it's just coincidence or misidentification, then why does it keep resurfacing? Why hasn't it faded into obscurity like countless other hoaxes? Why does it feel like it's hovering, waiting for something else to connect to it, something that would suddenly make it make sense? That's the thing about unresolved fragments. They don't disappear. They linger. They wait. And while all of this unfolds quietly in the background, there's another layer building in parallel, a reaction. Legal responses that come fast, almost too fast. Mentions that trigger immediate pushback. Names that seem to activate an invisible boundary the moment they're spoken in certain contexts. And while that could be dismissed as standard protection, standard reputation management, the speed, the consistency, it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like containment. Because containment doesn't mean something is false. It means something is sensitive. And sensitivity in high-profile worlds is currency. Then the focus shifts again, not to the past, but to the present, to what happens if this story doesn't stay contained. Because according to the file, there are growing murmurs, not confirmations, not official announcements, just murmurs that voices connected to that earlier chapter may not remain silent forever. That time changes things. That people who once chose silence may eventually choose something else. And if that happens, it wouldn't just reopen an old story, it would redefine it. Because this wouldn't be about a single rumor anymore. It would be about credibility, about narrative, about whether the version of events the world accepted was ever complete to begin with. And more dangerously, it would raise a question that institutions don't like being asked: what did they know and when did they know it? Because the moment an institution becomes part of the timeline, the stakes shift completely. It stops being personal. It becomes structural. And that's where the tension really starts to build, because now the story isn't just about Prince Harry and Meghan, it's about the environment they stepped into, the systems that operate behind the scenes, the invisible machinery that decides what is seen and what is quietly redirected. And here's the part that lingers long after everything else fades. Even if every rumor turned out to be exaggerated, even if every missing piece had a simple explanation, the pattern itself would still exist. The disappearances, the inconsistencies, the reactions, the timing. Patterns don't need to be fully proven to be significant, they just need to repeat. And this one keeps repeating, which leaves us with something far more unsettling than a confirmed firm truth. It leaves us with uncertainty that refuses to settle. Because if the past really was left behind, why does it feel like it's still moving? Why does it feel like something is building instead of fading? And why, after all this time, does it seem like the most important part of the story hasn't been told yet? Maybe it's still being held back. Maybe it's still being protected. Or maybe it's simply waiting for the moment when it can no longer be ignored. Because stories like this don't end quietly. They pause, they shift, they evolve. And when they come back, they don't just return with answers. They return with consequences.